Thank you. My name was just about the only thing I could make out there. So I would like to thank the previous speaker because the issues in relation to housing she outlined are very prevalent, clearly. There is one bit of reassurance I can offer straight away is that the worse this problem becomes, the more Estonia starts to be like the rest of the world. We are not really talking really about a local problem. We are talking about a systemic problem that is affecting the world as a whole. And that problem is that the value appreciation of real estate, the value appreciation of capital is quicker than the rise in wages of people, and that therefore no matter how well you do at your job, how much money you earn, whatever your career progression is, the price of housing always continues to rise faster than your income, and therefore you get poorer by working. That is the quintessential principle that is at work here, and I'm very happy to see that my own country, in a way, tops the list when it comes to that discrepancy, so thank you also for that. We discuss these problems a lot everywhere in the world, in conferences everywhere in the world, and what I would like to do a little bit is, I guess, hijack this conference, to dwell for a moment, not to talk about housing or architecture, but to talk about the way we have come to talk about architecture. I think the problem is that although these issues are discussed very often, they are discussed in such a way that won't help, that they are discussed very often in such a way that in a way will simply prolong the problem and will make anybody feel good about the fact that they're discussing them. But discussing alone clearly doesn't help. So this is a book I've written recently. It's called Architect Verb, the New Language of Building. It has no pictures, it's only text, so I guess it doesn't make for a very good presentation. It's also a bit about the English language, the prevailing language in which these things are being discussed. So the beginning is a bit of an English class, but you'll have to excuse me the indulgence. Let's talk with the word architect. My job, the job of a lot of people in this room, I guess. So the word architect features in the dictionary as a noun. The meaning of the word architect is a person whose job is to design new buildings and make certain that they are built correctly. After years of study, Tim, I'm really sorry, Tim is a man, is now a fully fledged architect. Increasingly, however, we are beginning to see the word as a verb. To design and configure a software program or system. Few software packages were architected with the Ethernet access in mind. This is, of course, the use of architect as a verb is particularly prevalent in the world of computing. And it's quite interesting that architect isn't the only term. Many terms from architecture actually have a second life as digital terms, as terms to describe digital or strategic concepts. Arena, blueprint, construct, framework, foundation, model, platform, scaffolding, sphere, stage, structure, theatre. All of these are words which are almost more known for their conceptual use than they are for their literal use as architectural typologies. So that the word architect verb comes from computing, but of course what happens is whenever you lend a word to another domain, it starts to impact the way you yourself use the word as well. So architect verb, meanwhile, also exists in architecture. What is it? I guess when it's a verb, it's the activity architects are considered to engage in. That's the first kind of vagary that enters the equation, whereas the definition as a noun was, I guess, clear. This is already somewhat abstruse. And so, let's say if you look at a sample sentence, I have to architect a solution that meets both the client's needs and the constraints of the project budget. I mean, that is hardly trading up. It doesn't make our discipline sound any more exciting than it did. And what you also see is that increasingly the word architect is kind of like a dirty word. In most, particularly British publications, the word architect is gradually being replaced by the more egalitarian term built environment practitioner. Now, what is that? A built environment practitioner, that you can only, it's not in the dictionary or anything, you can only reconstruct its meaning from sample sentences you find in newspapers. Built environment practitioners must lead the fight against climate change. Now, just for argument's sake, let's say a built environment practitioner is the same as an architect. We change the sample sentence. Architects must lead the fight against climate change. Right. Built environment practitioner is only one of these many long words, which in a way, despite their longer length, doesn't make things clearer. So built environment practitioner, we also have successful building. What is a successful building? A successful building is a building compliant with a certain measure of success, commonly unspecified. So therefore, a successful building is a or any building. View-based urbanism. Urbanism practiced with a particular consideration for the optics which ensue in its wake. In other words, urbanism, because I guess that's the principal job of all urbanism. Real work. Work that is real, as opposed to the work that is not. In other words, work. Forward planning. So the interesting thing is that the term, normally if you look up in a dictionary, you have a word and then you have a long definition. Here you have a long word which can actually be replaced by a very short definition. In other words, the definition and the word trade places. Forward planning is planning. End state vision, goal. Driver for change, problem. Key driver, idea. Visual design. But you also have non-visual design, which is a complete waste of time. All of this is funny. But when you really start delving into it, and if you are as paranoid as I am, you suspect an agenda. And when you suspect an agenda, you very rarely suspect a benign agenda. So let's look at what the effect of this language is. So the English language has a wonderful ability that if you leave away to work, you leave away a word is almost invariably a noun and a verb. Almost each word can exist as an activity or a thing. I've given the example, architect. Architect exists as a noun and a verb, but also the word concept, for instance. It's an abstract idea, but it's also the activity of generating concepts. Our team is concepting a whole new line of body products. The word design, of course, famously is a set of drawings showing how something is to be made. It is also to make or draw plans for something. And even the word work in English is, of course, a work or to work, to do a job or a job already done. And this accounts for the almost mesmerizing. Most of this book was written during COVID, when I could simply listen to people and jot down words that were being said over Zoom or Teams. But it creates a curious situation, where everybody is looking at everybody else, wondering whether they are there to present what they have done or whether they are there to actually comment on what others have done, which leads to a kind of wonderful collectively shared inertia. Anyway, green, sometimes a word is a noun, a verb, green to make environmentally friendly, or an adjective. And of course, green in its most basic definition is a color. You can actually do a little exercise where there are so many new words that you can translate English into English. So let's try a sample sentence. Architects will try to design green buildings to further improve the quality of the environment. In the newspeak, that becomes built environment practitioners architect the green, green, green. And at this point, you know, the whole smart sustainability, mindful build, environment practitioners, architect, the green, green, green. It becomes a kind of dada, where it's almost the ring of the language that is the primal purpose rather than the meaning, where in a way the sound of words is completely divorced from meaning. That is one thing, the interchangeability between nouns and verbs. There is also the trend that almost no noun, no term ever features anymore without an adjective. Let's look at that. There is design. We all know what design is, but you rarely, rarely, rarely come across the term on its own anymore. There is people-first design. Now, people-first design is design that puts people first. That suggests that there is a design that doesn't. Anticipatory design, design that preempts the future. Narrative-driven design, design driven by a certain narrative. Evidence-based design, design based on the application of knowledge and insight generated by process. I think evidence-based design is just simply a euphemism for unoriginal ideas. But that is a different thing. There is emancipatory design, design with a specific focus on benefiting people disadvantaged because of disability, gender, or race. There is equitable design, design aimed at groups that have been historically underrepresented, taking into consideration gender, sexuality, race, ethnicity, nationality, and ability. See also emancipatory design. So that's all fine. I mean, these are all viciously good intentions. But you wonder, you know, what does that make of design when it features without an adjective? It becomes a suspect term. It's a nearsighted, whimsical, semi-immoral act with no rationale that hinders emancipation, is oblivious to the underrepresented, ignores the facts, and puts people last. And anybody who's associated with design becomes a kind of criminal by default. I wonder whether all of this is good, but it's having an impact, and it's having an impact on our profession in no uncertain terms. David Adjaye, and this is all put together before David Adjaye was discovered to engage in somewhat different type of activities as well. David Adjaye, the Sydney Community Centre informed by Aboriginal concept. Brooklyn Community Centre to disrupt the racial wealth gap. I look at it and, well, okay, sure. This recent winner of the gold medal, she now does this type of architecture in floodplains, but until recently she did this type of architecture. And on the account of winning the gold medal, this was a statement. I really had to shed the ego. And now I think of myself, what a terror I was when I designed these shiny corporate buildings. And it gets to the stage where an apology becomes a form of PR. You look at it, let's look for another one, Aboriginal Art Culture Centre for Adelaide, Indigenous Design Principle. I mean, it looks like... and even perfectly respectable narcissists in the world of architecture now make modular tent classroom for refugees. And it made me think of a moment we have encountered a long time ago in pop music. It made me think of, this is the architectural equivalent of We Are the World. We are the children, make the world a better place. And the echo is somewhat uncanny. I guess we all know how this is. This is the Bjarke Ingels, the champion of sustainability. Sustainability can't be like some sort of moral sacrifice, a political dilemma, of course not, or a philanthropic cause. It has to be a design challenge. So he's invented the notion of hedonistic sustainability, the admixture of environmental ecology and fun. Two commonly thought incompatible phenomena, organized fun for the ecologically aware. This is what you call a contradictio in terminus, you know, the amalgamation of two words which cannot be amalgamated. We all know what hedonism is, the old ancient Greek term, the belief that pleasure is the most important thing in life, the hedonistic philosophy of eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. And of course the Greeks and the Romans knew very, very, very well what hedonism looked like. So that's the sort of things I sprout in this book. The book has 10 chapters, and each of the chapters deals with a particular phenomenon that has been prevalent during a particular period of time during the last 25 years. So that there's 10 of them, so I guess that indicates that the prevalence of each was about 2.5 years, which I think is indicative of their gravitas somehow. And I'd like to present than one by one. Architecture, the work of architects whose celebrity and critical acclaim, architecture used to be serving the public. Architecture used to be an emphatically public activity. This building is extremely known. The author of it is a mystery. This building is extremely well known, but its author is almost more famous than the building. This is the Guggenheim Bilbao. The Guggenheim Bilbao, of course, at the time in the 1990s, heralded as a complete miracle, a miracle of a building that wasn't just a beautiful building, but transformed the fate of an entire city, of an entire region, almost by, well, just by being a building. Of course, an enormous praise in the press, an enormous amount of global attention, the combination of the Guggenheim and a famous architect, and for the first time that the effect of a building was monetized. So 25 million visitors and an apparent revenue for the city of Bilbao at 6.5 billion euros. So that is interesting because, I mean, buildings normally, when I talk about money in relation to buildings, it's generally to clients. Then it's how much it costs, and it always costs too much. And it always has to cost less and less and less and less. But, I mean, buildings cost money. Here, for the first time, it was evident that buildings make money. And if buildings make money, so much money, why should they cost so little money? Why is there always downward pressure? So that, in a way, created over time that the realization with that among architects created the kind of series of other museums in other cities which didn't make the cities any more famous than they were, but left a kind of huge amount of budget overruns in their wakes. Imperial War Museum in North America from 28 to 40 million. The public, West Bromwich, 35 million to 72 million. The Science Centre in Wolfsburg, 67 million became 79 million. The Musée de Confluence by Equitone, 61, actually more than 4 times as much. Eisenman in Galicia, 109 million, became 400 million. And of course, the absolute hero of budget overruns is Santiago Calatrava, who ended up spending nearly $1 billion on the City of Sciences in Valencia. And here he almost consumed the profit the city was going to make off the building preemptively on building the building. So it's hardly a surprise that, you know, after a certain period of time, the Bilbao effect ran into a dead end. It became a pretext for very expensive buildings which didn't do very much. So is the Bilbao effect over? I would argue very, very partly, because the Bilbao, the star architecture phenomenon has now been succeeded by another phenomenon, the phenomenon of world class. World class is that you're among the best in the world. And since you can't discuss the qualities of architecture in measurable terms, there are other qualities, like, for instance, height. This is the tallest building in the world, in Dubai, the Burj Khalifa. And of course, neighboring Emirates couldn't stay behind, but it's a big effort to make an even taller building. So what they did is they didn't make the world's tallest building. What they did is, in a way, make a leaning building. And this is the world's farthest man-made leaning building in the world, and it sets a record. You know, all of the leaning buildings that we know, they more or less lean because out of accident, because gravity got the better of them over time. But this is one intentionally made to lean 18 degrees. The architect that designed it has authored a book about, he as well, authored a book about it entitled 18 Degrees, and the building is officially listed in the Guinness Book of Records, just as the Burj Khalifa is. So that's an interesting trend, because there are lots of buildings that set records. There is, you know, the largest building in the world was the Pentagon. This is a building in Saudi Arabia. It's the largest mirrored building in the world. Whenever they get to build the line, it won't be longer that. This is the most slender tower built in the world. This is the highest outdoor infinity pool built in the world. The first artificial fog building, the largest indoor Ferris wheel. I mean, you wonder why you would make a Ferris wheel indoor, but it kind of defeats the purpose. But you're the only one, and if you're the only one, you're by definition the best. The largest building in the shape of a star, the largest building in the shape of a picture frame, the largest building in the shape of a shoe, and even the world's ugliest building. Now, the last one isn't really in the Guinness Book of Records. I just made that up. But it is the winner of an award. This is the winner of 2006 of the so-called Carbuncle Award after a Prince Charles speech. That's every year, the ugliest building realized in the UK gets a prize. And it's carried as a badge of pride. And this is the Carbuncle Award. This is the cup that is this. And this is another trend, the trend of excellence in architecture. The prize in architecture, the first ever prize was given is the Prix de Rome in 1720, with a number of branch-offs in the Netherlands and Belgium the century after, the Rieber Gold Medal in the middle of the 19th century, other prizes in the 20th century, and as time moved along, the Pritzker Prize in 1979, then the Mies van der Rohe Award. As time moved on, the number of awards in architecture escalated, just as the records did, to the point that we have a whole load of awards. The interesting thing is we almost have more awards than we have projects. So it's no longer projects competing for awards, it is awards competing for projects. Generally, most awards are given to responsible modern building and archetypal modern architects. As you can see here, but there is a reaction. So an award for modern buildings triggers a whole series of awards for traditional buildings. So there's the Palladio Awards, there is the Dryhouse Prize. I think the imagery sort of speaks for itself. The Vincent Scully Prize, the last prize architects get before they definitively pass away, I guess. And so the amount of awards proliferate, and not just are awards there for buildings. There are awards now also awarded for gender, young architects awards, emerging architects, ethical architecture, and also non-architecture now to the word. So in some way, the adjectives, in a way, generate their own awards. By far the most awards and labels are given to sustainability. A very often used term, a term which I guess I could speak an entire evening about its dubious effect on the world, although in itself a perfectly laudable thing, of course. This is a sustainable building. It's the the Palazzo Casino, Venetian Palazzo Casino in Las Vegas. It is a sustainable building. It is that because it has bike racks. It is that because it has room cards that tell when towels are replaced. It has landscaping that doesn't use grass, very important. Parking for fuel-efficient cars, and they got the LEED award. On the back of getting the LEED award, it got a 27 million tax break, which gave it a very wide following in the United States of other buildings doing the same kind of thing, and which in a way led there too to a plethora not just of awards but also of sustainability accreditations, almost as many as there are buildings built. Each of these, and this is the crux of what I wanted to talk about, each of these rely on very, very careful systems of measurements. And I guess ecological performance is something you can measure. You can wonder how concretely you can measure it, whether you ever capture the full carbon or whatever that is involved in building a building, but they try, and the lists get ever longer. But what is the worrying thing is that it's not just measurable things that get measured in the current world. It is also essentially unmeasurable emotive things which are increasingly endowed with measurements. So there is livability. And there are the famous livability ranks, as though livability is something you can measure. Normally, if you look at it, it's simply completely congruent to how unaffordable housing is in a city. The more unaffordable housing is, the higher the city ranks on a livability list. Well-being is, again, the subject of ranking. Creativity is something you can measure. It's also Australia is the most creative country in the world for some reason. And even beauty, the quintessential subjective notion of beauty is increasingly the subject of charge, percentages, measurements, etc. What makes a great place is something you can reason, you can measure, you can deconstruct. And this leads me to the ultimate term in the book. It's the term placemaking. This is a very interesting term. It doesn't feature in the dictionary. If you type it in Microsoft Word, it gives you one of these beautiful red wrinkles underneath, like, this is a non-existent word. Nevertheless, this is a word which has captured the whole architectural and urbanistic and even political world as a storm. There are now directors of placemaking in local governments. There is a ministry of place, I think, that just got axed, etc., etc. And all the while, the meaning of the term is completely vague. The closest thing you can get to a definition is in Wikipedia. It's a 150 words definition, after which you read it, you're no clearer. The clearest explanation is, in a way, the picture that accompanies it. When you put a piano in a public space, you have made a place. You can imagine the music you can play there. And then this is the definition of the original inventor of Fred Kent, the inventor of the word. Placemaking is an innate ability that we all have, which also makes this, I think, a kind of placemaking. This was my favorite example of the term, the Gillette shows. Anyway, last thing I would like to enter on, and then I stop, is the word innovation. When I wrote the book, AI was in its infancy. ChatGPT hadn't been launched and anything, so there is no way of talking about innovation in architecture without talking about AI. AI will have massive repercussions, even if we don't fully grasp yet what the repercussions are. Multiple, not just text programs, but image-making programs, design programs, make its way into our profession. You can do the most amazing things, particularly a kind of crossbreeding like you can do with dogs. This is Frank Lloyd Wright meets UN Studio. This is whipped cream and architecture. This is kind of pairing shells, I guess, a timber cave, incompatible things, this is kind of Stefano Boeri meets Erich Mendelssohn. This is crème brûlée with a front door. This is an inhabitable water lily. This is Antonio Gaudi in red. This is Antonio Gaudi crossed over with Turkish pastry. This is Antonio Gaudi caught by a terrible disease. This is tropical Gaudi. This is a tropical flesh-eating building. This is that same building after it's been fed. This is Hundertwasser that has been left in the fridge for too long. And this is an exercise in prompting. This is the image you get when you enter the term mixed youth and Gothic. This is what you get. This is what you get when you enter the terms Palladio and Darth Vader. I don't really want to know, I think, what the prompt here was. This is what you get when you have bedroom tomb. And the kind of people who make this thing actually sign it as though they're authentic works of art. This is, it looks like something from a Donald Trump apartment. This is also interesting. The amount of ornament you can generate via AI is so extreme that it starts to look like a lack of maintenance, like a form of pollution. The ornament gets to be like cobwebs. And this is interesting, of course. Designing is divorced from effort, both from the effort of drawing and from the effort of production. With the tip of a fingertip, you can make the most ornate columns. And if you couple that to 3D printing, you can actually produce or build the most ornate things in an instant. And you look at modern architecture, where production, industrial production, in a way, dictated a formal language. We designed what was easy and quick to produce. Currently, ornament, once again, is easy and quick to produce, which means that Ornament and Crime, the famous book by Adolf Loos, simply becomes ornament in the 21st century. I had to look back at buildings and ideas from the past. This is Robert Stern, who is, of course, delighted over all of these things, but it creates a completely value-free universe in architecture where Bruno Leschi and Shigeru Ban can simply be crossed over, where Ravenna and Aalto meet in sync, where Borromini and Mario Botta become one and the same. Architectural style is refused to kind of alphabetically ordered names in a phone book. Pick one. It's not as easy as I make it sound, I believe. This is an article about prompt crafting by Patrick Schumacher, who I think must know what he's talking about. How it all works and how there is an endlessly iterative process back and forth with entering the right word in order to get the result. You are entering the right word, you get a result. So there is a proliferation of options, even more than in the analog world. And it made me think, I'm old enough to remember the introduction of AutoCAD and the disappearance of drawing board from architects' practices. And this was supposed to be the nirvana. Once we had this tool, we could earn our salary and we could all go to the Bahamas. Essentially, this was somehow not the case. You look at the whole technical escalation in our profession, and at the same time we sort of work longer hours than ever, because just as with the affordability of housing, salaries may increase, prices increase faster. The tools of production may increase, the expectations increase faster. There is a permanent rat race against the development where we get ever further behind no matter what we invent. This was an article about artificial intelligence that cultural workers were forced either working as supervisors of an ever more automated machine or reinventing themselves as personalities with no particular task, which is not necessarily an attractive prospect per se. This is my last slide. This is the world's first building completely generated by AI, and it sort of looks suspiciously like any building that is created without it. That is it. That is the subject matter of the book, which I hope pertains some relevance to what you intended to discuss today. Thank you.
Can you please stay on the stage? We might have some questions for you. I know there's one question in Slido. And it's a very topical question. In Estonia, what are the trends in architecture regarding public safety and crisis preventions when you think about streets and buildings?
I have no idea. I mean,
bomb shelters are a big topic in Estonia. For some reason, when you look at to the east.
Well, maybe there's some older ones that can be recycled from former times. But
that is also a debate, actually.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Civil protection units. Yeah.
Yeah, I really hesitate to pose as an expert on concrete subjects.
Ladies and gentlemen, do you have any questions that you would like to raise? And to raise a question, raising a hand is the easiest option if you haven't already typed it in to Slido, and I don't think there are questions in Slido. It's okay if you don't have any, because we have a panel coming where Reinier... Oh, we have a question, Sille. Do we also have a microphone for Sille to ask that question? So it gets recorded as well. Then we can inspect your intelligent question in the recording later on. Go ahead.
Thank you for a very interesting lecture. I really appreciated it. I like that when you arrived in the end to the AutoCAD, the premises, that you also remember that computer-aided design could have been or should have been the way forward. But don't you have a feeling that it actually turned out to be computer-aided drawing machine and in a way not really leading or pushing the design that much forward as the premises were? I mean, you were practicing architect at the time, so you might know better, but I'm just wondering if this CAD premises was actually the one given, and maybe now it's the time to actually start computer-aided design era.
I think what computer-aided design did at the time is that it allowed the same process that happened before to unfold faster. So it had an effect on the speed, it had an effect on production, and it had also an effect on expectations, how quickly things could be finished. So it in a way contributed in the end to the downward pressure on architects' fees. I think you can sort of make an inventory on the simultaneous development of architects' fees and technological development. I think, and that goes for a lot of technologies. I think maybe BIM, if you look at building integrated modeling, that mainly has an effect because you have a drawing space in which you have a general rehearsal for building. I mean, all the consultants, the architect, they draw in the same model, and if the the structural engineer doesn't really do what the architect wants, the disaster happens in virtual space. Hopefully that it doesn't happen in real space. And this is, of course, partly dictated by massive insurance premiums related to buildings. So we have a fantasy about the possibilities of technology all the time, when actually there is quite a sinister effect of technology, that it's just simply, there is a hardcore framework around architects which closes in on them ever more. The more we imagine freedoms of new technologies, the more we find our freedoms constrained very often. AI, I'm no expert, I must say. We use it mainly for fun so far. And I think both in imagery and language, it's so far really a form of exacerbated cliches. I mean, my main confrontation with AIs is job applications that come into the office, which are now written by us, and you can really pick them out. I mean, they are even more sustainable, creative, innovative, world-class, award-winning placemaking than all the things before. So I don't know. I really don't know. I think technology is a dream you chase forever and you never quite catch.
So one question that has popped up on Slido: have you tried asking AI sustainable and affordable housing? What does it make up?
Well, what it makes up is a plethora of images which you already know and you already see. But of course, AI has no ultimately, the question behind sustainable and affordable housing is ultimately political. I mean, no design program has an answer. We have a curious situation in the world, for instance. If we want to build affordable housing, we have to build a lot at a very cheap pace. If we want to save the climate, we shouldn't build at all, because construction industry is at the same time the most polluting industry of all. So there is a conflict of interest, which is fairly obvious. It's an elephant in the room. Nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody talks about it. AI talks about what everybody talks about, basically, because the internet is its brain. So AI also doesn't give you the answer there. There's a very sinister sum you can do. If you calculate all built substance in the world, and you divide it by global population, we would all have a fairly decent home. So in other words, there is enough built substance in the world to house all of mankind. But then that means that you need massive expropriations. You need to revise the whole economic system. We have most of our buildings serve to invest. With money in the bank giving minimal returns on interest rates, we buy buildings. Those buildings are homes not for people, because a lot of them are empty. They are home for money, looking for bigger revenues. And as long as that remains the case, I think no design solution will tackle it. That is a deeply embedded systemic political problem.
Do architects have a role to play here? Because the Estonian architect community certainly feels like there should be something to be done.
Well, it's very difficult, because, of course, both the political clout and even the popular sway of architects is extremely limited. I mean, they're people regarded by most as people, with lofty, pretentious, snobbish concerns, etc. But I have an analogy here. There is, at the boards of Shell, at the boards of Chevron, at the boards of ExxonMobil, you have activist shareholders who find their way in. They're kind of a company conscience which buys a limited amount of the shares to make a lot of trouble. And they are effective in changing the course of giant businesses. And I think that is an interesting... nobody needs an architect to realize a building. In fact, 99% of all built substance in the world happens without architects. The point is that when you have an architect, you have a different building than you would normally have. So it doesn't invent building, it invents consciousness. And I think that's what it could bring. And then it would really have to tie with major, with Vinci with Hochtief, with kind of the major builders to sort of push them into other technologies and buildings. And I think when we see that kind of activism in architecture, then there might be some hope.
Art, you wanted to raise a question?
Yeah, thank you for a really thorough insight into ourselves, let's say. My question would be, what's the perspective? What takes you in the office every Monday?
Oh, I do my job with a great delight. I mean, I generally, all of this writing I produce after 5:30 or whenever I decide to leave. But you know, I get this question a lot. Why do you do what you do when you think what you think? You know, and I would like to revert that. I can only think what I think because I do what I do. I mean, if I weren't confronted aggressively with the way the world works in the most vulgar terms, I couldn't theorize at all. And I think what is lacking in the world of architecture and all the theorizing it does, what is really lacking is a form of street wisdom. You know, and if you cultivate street wisdom to a great extreme, it becomes a philosophical theory in its own right. I would even argue that most pregnant philosophies that have endured are in a way a form of sophisticated street wisdom. So partly going into the office is in a way to harvest the material for the writing, and part of going into the office is to try and do what happens anyway, a little bit more conscientious and better. And you know, I wasn't always a writer. I became one over time. You know, the less I understood AutoCAD, AI, and BIM, the more this is what remained.
Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Reinier. Thank you so much.
Thank you.